Hello and welcome to this video lesson. In this video lesson we will be looking at surface area and volumes of square pyramids. A square pyramid is a shape that has a square-based base. Well, the base looks like a square and it extrudes to a point. So if we start labeling some of these properties, this one over here is the height, and that's the distance from the center of the base, which is right here, if we call this the square base, center here all the way to the top. There is B, this is kind of the base value here, so that's the length of the square. We are going to label it as B. And finally, from top here to the midpoint or the middle of the length, so looking at this little triangle over here, and its height, which again from the midpoint of the length all the way to the top, we call that the slant height. So I'm going to label this as slanted height or slant height. And this is just the length of the side of the square. Now let's say we wanted to draw out the net of the shape over here. So here we will have a square base, so that would be the square. We would have one triangle, two triangles, and these triangles all have the same sides. And this one. So in terms of lengths, this would be B, this would be B. From here to here, this height over here would be called the slant height, because when we fold this side up, it becomes this, and the height over here is the slant height. And we can't see the height, we can't see the actual height, the non-slant height from the net here. So now if we wanted to take the surface area of the shape, we would have to be looking at the area of this square plus the area of this triangle, this triangle, this triangle, this triangle, all added together. So the area of this square over here would be, so I'm just going to write surface area is equal to area of the base plus 4 times area of the triangles. And the reason why it's 4 is because we simply have 4 triangles over here. So we're looking at 1 base area and 4 triangle areas. The base is a square, so its area would be b times b, which is b squared. And the triangle's area is always base times height divided by 2. Its base value is b, and its height is the slant height. So it becomes 4 times b. Its height is slant height divided by 2. To simplify this, we can also write it as b squared. And here I have 4 divided by 2, which makes 2. So plus 2b times s. So my surface area would equal to b squared plus 2 times b times s. Now for the volume, what we're going to do is we're going to draw out a rectangular prism which has a base shape of a square, and similarly we are going to draw a square pyramid which has the same height. So let's say these two shapes both have the same height and they have the same length for their square side. So now if I were to fill up this square pyramid with a liquid and start pouring it into my rectangular prism, it will take 3 times to fill up the whole square pyramid. So exactly 3 times. And this means that if this shape over here has volume V, this shape over here will have 1/3 of the same volume, because it takes 3 times to fill up this shape from this shape. So for the volume of our shape over here, we know that it's 1/3 of the volume of a rectangular prism, and this rectangular prism over here has a base B and a height of h. So it will be B times h. So to simplify this, B times B is B squared, so it's 1/3 B squared h. Or simply put, you can also write it as B squared h over 3. And this is the volume of a square pyramid. Alright, let's do a few examples. So the first example says calculate the volume and surface area of the square pyramid below, and what's given to us is the following. We're given that the height of the pyramid is 10 and that the slant height is 15. So what I want you folks to do is to take a look at the question, try to figure out what approach you're going to take to solve it, try it out, and then come back and watch the answer. Alright, let's write down the equations of surface area and volume. So surface area is equal to B squared plus 2 times B times S, and volume is equal to B squared h over 3. So for the surface area, I will need the base and the slant height. I have the slant height, but I don't have the base. And for volume, I need the base and the height, and I have the height, but I don't have the base. So I do have to calculate the base in order to be able to calculate the surface area and volume. If I look at this shape, I can see that here's the height, here is a length, and here's the slant height. And I can see that this triangle over here, the pink one, is forming a right angle triangle. So let's draw this shape out right over here. So here I have my slant height, that's this one over here. Here is my height, and this length over here is this length over here. However, it's not B, it's not the B value, because B value is the whole length, but this is actually going from the top to the center, and if it's the center, that means this length over here must be B over 2, or B divided by 2. So I'm going to put that down over here, and I'm going to put a right angle triangle over there. So again, I have my slant height, I have my height, and I have B over 2, which is the length of the side of the square divided by 2. Now I have my slant height, I have my height, and what I'm trying to find is my B value so that I can plug it into here. So I'm going to use Pythagorean. with Pythagorean theorem, I can write that s squared is equal to h squared plus b over 2 squared. And that means the hypotenuse squared is equal to one of the shorter sides squared plus the shortest side squared, which is b over 2. And you have to make sure that you're putting b over 2 inside brackets here for this to work out. So I can plug in the numbers right away, or I can solve it algebraically and plug all the numbers at the very end. I'm going to solve it algebraically and plug in all the numbers at the end, but you're free to start up by writing the values. So I'm trying to isolate for b over here. B over 2 is inside the brackets and it's being squared. So before doing anything, I need to isolate this term, and this term is being added to h squared. So the first step is to subtract h squared from both sides. When I subtract it from the right side, h squared cancels and it moves to the left side. So what I will get is that s squared minus h squared is equal to b over 2 squared. Now there are many ways to approach this problem from here. So I'm trying to isolate for b over here. What I will do first is I will square b and the 2 here. I just want to get rid of this bracket. So what I will do is I will do s squared minus h squared is equal to b squared over 2 squared. And remember from exponent laws, if you have a fraction which is being raised to an exponent, that exponent needs to be distributed to both the numerator and the denominator. So the next step becomes s squared minus h squared is equal to b squared over 4. And to get rid of this 4 over here, I will multiply both sides by 4, and I will end up getting 4 times s squared minus h squared is equal to b squared. Now I will just change it and write it as b squared is equal to 4 times s squared minus h squared. That way it's just a little bit easier to see. Now to solve for b, I will have to square root both sides. I will get b is equal to plus or minus square root of 4s squared minus h squared. Now b will become plus or minus 4 times my s value, which is 15 squared, minus my h value, which is 10 squared. If I plug this into my calculator with proper method, I should get plus or minus, or approximately plus or minus 22.4 as my answer. And this is 3 significant figures. It's actually 22.3607, and the decimals, or there are much more significant figures. I'm just going to include 3 of them. And I know that since length cannot be a negative value, b has to be larger than 0. That means that b is approximately 22.4, just a positive value. Now I should make sure that when I'm plugging in this value into these equations, I'm using the exact value, that I'm not just taking 22.4, which is an estimate, and putting it into this, but I'm actually putting as many significant figures as I can within my equations here. So if you have a scientific calculator, you can probably find out how you can save numbers into it, and from that you can easily put the exact value into your calculator. Alright, so now we have found our base value. We have to put it back into the equation. So I know that surface area is equal to b squared, which is approximately 22.4 squared. I'm going to put an approximation sign here because I'm using an approximate value. 2 times 22.4 multiplied by the s value, which is 15. And once I plug those into my calculator, I will get 1170.82. And if I want to take just 3 significant figures, my first significant figure is 1, second one is 1, third one is 1, fourth one is a 0, so I don't have to round up my 7 here. So my final answer would be 1170, and my unit is centimeters, so my surface area would be centimeters squared. And I will box my answer right here. Now, to find the volume, I will do the same thing, plug in my values, 22.4, H value is 10, and I'm dividing it all by 3, and I forgot the square here. Once I plug this into my calculator and I use the exact value that I obtained here into the b value here, I should get my final answer as 1666.6, all repeated. And since it's an estimation, I want to leave my answer in 3 significant figures. And my first significant figure is a 1, second one is a 6, third one is a 6, and fourth one is 6, which is higher than 5 or larger. So I will have to go back and round this value over here, and I have to round it up. So I get 1, 6. Instead of the 6, it's rounded up to a 7, 0. So it's 1670 centimeter cubed is my volume. So the steps to solve these type of questions is to first look at what you're given. Usually if you're given height and slanted height, or if you're given any other information, you have to draw this triangle, the right angle triangle, label it as SHB/2, and use that set of information to find the unknown. Here I'm given height and slant height, so my unknown is the b value in order to be able to plug it into the volume and surface area equations. And once I have this triangle, I can use Pythagorean Theorem to find the missing side. And once I have that side, I can just plug it right into the equation. So the steps that you should be looking out for with these type of questions, one is to use Pythagorean Theorem properly. So method mark for using Pythagorean, and using proper values. So proper equation, proper numbers, general method of actually solving and getting a proper missing side, and then using that side properly into the proper equations. So proper equation, proper number for 2 method marks and an accuracy, and similarly here, method mark for proper numbers, proper equation, and finally an accurate answer at the end. The second question tells us to calculate volume and surface area of the square pyramid below. This time we're given slant height and the base value. So last time we were given height and slant height. This time we're given slant height and the base value, or the length of the square. So these are the information given to us. We know that the surface area is equal to b squared plus 2 times b times s, and that the volume is equal to b squared h over 3. For the surface area, we need the base value, which we have, and we need the slant height, which we also have. So we can plug that right into the equation right away. So I will get 8 squared plus 2 times 8 times 5. And you can plug this right into your calculator. I'm just going to solve it step by step. So 8 squared is 64. 2 times 8 times 5. You can think of it as 2 times 5 is 10. 10 times 8 is 80. And if I add these up, I should get 144. And my unit is meters squared. So surface area, just had to plug in those values and get our surface area. For the volume, we need the base value, or the length of the square side, which we have as 8, but we don't have the height. So we have to calculate the height. We have slant height, and we have b, and we have a right angle triangle. So let's do the same steps we did last time. B over 2, S, and H. We know that it's a right angle triangle, so hypotenuse squared is equal to H squared plus B over 2 squared. Last time we followed the steps using algebra. This time I'm going to plug in the numbers right away so that you can have an idea of how that works. It's a little bit less steps and you can use your calculator, but it is a good practice of algebra going through the steps like we did in the last practice question. So S value is 5. So 5 squared is equal to H, I don't know, I'm trying to find that out, plus B value, which is 8 divided by 2 squared. I'm going to use BEDMAS. So first step in BEDMAS is brackets. I have 8 over 2 here, so I will get 5 squared is equal to H squared plus 8 divided by 2, which is 4 squared. And then the next step of BEDMAS is exponents. So 5 squared is 25 is equal to H squared plus 4 squared, which is 16. Now I'm trying to solve for H here, and to do that I will have to subtract 16 from both sides, and I will end up getting 25 minus 16 is equal to H squared, so 9 is equal to H squared. And I can write that as H squared is equal to 9. I'm just switching the two sides, left hand side and right hand side. And finally, I know that I can take the square root of both sides and I will get H is equal to plus or minus square root of 9. A really nice round number, I like it. H is equal to plus or minus square root of 9 is 3. Since height cannot be a negative value, H has to be, because it's a length, so H has to be larger than 0, and therefore H is equal to 3 meters. Now that I have my H value, my life has become very, very simple. All I have to do is plug in the B value, which is 8 squared, multiply it by my height, which is 3, and then divide it by 3. This is nice because 3 divided by 3, they cancel out, and I'm left with 8 squared, which is 64, and therefore my volume is 64 meters cubed. I'm going to box that answer. So the steps were the same as last time. You're looking at what you're given. You can write down the equation of surface area and volume and see if you're missing anything. In this case, for surface area, I had all the information, so I plugged it in and I got my answer. For the steps, putting in the proper equation, putting in the proper values, and finally getting a correct answer as an accuracy mark. I then looked at my volume and I had the b value, which was the length of the side of the square, but I did not have my height, so I had to use Pythagorean Theorem to find that. And once I found the h value, I just plugged it back into the equation and I got my volume. So in terms of steps, again, using proper equation, putting proper numbers within the equation, solving it properly algebraically, and finally giving a proper answer, so an accuracy mark at the end, is also important. It's good to recognize and put this down that length has to be positive and that h is plus or minus 3. It is, I would say it's required if you're thinking about going into more advanced math to write this format, because when you're looking at this, when we say h squared is equal to 9, we can do negative 3 times negative 3 to give us 9, and positive 3 times positive 3 to give us 9. And that's why the plus or minus sign is coming here. So mathematically, we do need to write down that h is equal to plus or minus 3. But since in our real life situation here, length cannot have a negative value, we have to write that h is larger than 0 and that h, or the height, is only positive 3 meters. Once I have all that, once I find my h value, I need to put it into proper equation, proper values, and solve it to get my final volume. And you can put this in your calculator if you want, or practice your algebra a little bit and try to solve it and get an exact value. Okay, our next question says to calculate the volume and surface area of the square pyramid below. This time we're given the base value and the height value. So these are the information given to us. We know that surface area is equal to b squared plus 2 times b times s, and that the volume is equal to b squared h over 3. For the surface area, we need the base value, which we do have as 10, and we need a slant height value, which we don't have, so we have to find that. For volume, we need base value, which we do, and the height value, which we also have. So this is nice. We can plug in those values. So volume is equal to 10 squared times 12 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4, and 10 squared is 100, so I have 100 times 4, so the volume is simply 400, and I don't have a unit here, so let's add a unit. Let's do centimeters. So this will become centimeters cubed is my volume. So finding volume was easy. Unfortunately for the surface area, I do need to find my slant height, so I have to draw my triangle to help me. This is S, this is H, and this is B over 2. And this is a right angle triangle. I know that S squared is equal to H squared plus B over 2 squared. I am trying to find my S value. I will just plug in the values right away. I will get 12 squared plus B value, which is 10 divided by 2. Actually, let's write it out. 10 divided by 2 squared. Bed mass, 12 squared plus 10 divided by 2 is 5 squared. 12 squared is 144, and 5 squared is 25, and adding those I will get 169 as my s squared. Now you don't have to write all these steps down, you can just use your calculator and go from here right into here, but it is again a good practice. Now I know that s squared is equal to 169, so to get s I have to take the square root of 169, and this is one of the ones that I think all students or most students should know by heart, and I will get plus or minus 13 as my slant height. Since slant height is a length, it has to be larger than 0, and therefore slant height will equal to 13 centimeters. Great, I love round numbers, so plugging in all my values back in here, surface area is equal to b squared, which is 10 squared, plus 2 times b, which is 10, times s, which is 13. 10 squared is 100, 2 times 10 is 20, 20 times 130 is 260, and if I add these I will get 360 as my surface area. And don't forget the unit, I will get centimeters squared for my unit. So following the marking scheme for these type of questions, looking at for the volume, you just need to use the equation, proper values, and get the proper answer. After that, you need to use Pythagorean Theorem, so method for using it, method for plugging in proper values, method for properly solving for s and getting a correct solution. And once you have that, you need to put it into proper equation with proper numbers and get a final value. Alright, the last question says that the volume of a square pyramid is 384 meters cubed. This pyramid has a height of 8 meters. Find its surface area. Now, unlike the other questions, we are not given the side lengths of the pyramid, but we're given its volume and only one parameter, which is the height. So in order to find surface area, let's write that equation down actually. So surface area is equal to b squared plus 2 times b times s. So we need the base and we need the slant height, but we're only given the height. So we have to come up with a strategy to find those two missing sides. So think about how you're going to tackle this problem first, try it out, and once you're finished, come back and check the answer. So just pause for a second and come back. Okay, so once again, when we look at this, we have the surface area equation, which requires the base and the slant height, and we're given none of those, but we are given volume and we're given the height. So let's use that set of information first. So we know that volume is equal to b squared times h divided by 3, and we are given our volume as 384, and we're given our height, which is 8. So I can simply substitute those values into this equation over here, and I will have 384 is equal to b squared multiplied by 8 divided by 3. And as you can see, I have all the numbers except one variable here, so I can solve this equation and actually get the b value. So let's try that. So my first step is to get rid of this 3 over here. And to do that, I need to multiply both sides by 3. So I will get 384 times 3 on the left-hand side, which will equal to 1152, and that will equal to b squared times 8, or simply 8b squared. Now, to get rid of the 8 and isolate b squared, I need to divide both sides by 8. I'm just going to write my steps in red here. And the 8s will cancel out, and 1152 divided by 8 gives me 144. That is equal to b squared. I'm just going to switch sides for better form and take square root of both sides, plus or minus 144. And this is another number that I believe most students should be able to take the square root of, and that will be plus or minus 12 for b. b is a length, so b has to be larger than 0, or a positive value, and therefore b is equal to 12, and my unit is meters. Now, looking at the equation again, I have surface area is equal to b squared plus 2bs. I now have my b value, which is nice. I don't have my slant height yet, but I have my height and I have my b value. So this is fantastic. All I have to do is draw out my right angle triangle, and I have my hypotenuse as s, my height and b over 2 as my short length. It could be one of the longer lengths, but we can just draw it out like this and do the calculations. So s squared is equal to h squared plus b over 2 squared. I'm going to plug in all the values. So s value is what I'm trying to find. So s squared is equal to h squared, which is, well, my height is 8 squared, plus b, which is 12 divided by 2 squared. We're going to use bed mass, so we're going to have 64 plus, inside the bracket is 12 divided by 2, which is 6 squared. That's 64 plus 36, which is, oh, another round number. Great numbers here. So s will equal to plus or minus square root of 100, which is plus or minus 10. And we know that the slant height is a length, so it has to be positive and larger than 0, and therefore s is equal to 10 meters. I now have all the information I need to calculate my surface area. So surface area is equal to b squared plus 2 times b times s. B value is 12 squared plus 2 times b value again 12, s value, which is 10. 12 squared is 144. Here I'm going to think of it as 2 times 10, which is 20, and 20 times 12, which is 240. When I add these up, I get surface area as being 384 meters squared. And that would be my final answer. You will notice that the volume and the surface area have the exact same value. Again, they don't mean the same thing, because volume represents the space within the pyramid, whereas the surface area is the area of the sides of the pyramid. So there are two different things. Their value happens to be the same in this question, and don't let that trick you. your answer would have been correct if you did follow the proper procedure. Your final answer would be correct. So in terms of steps for this, first of all, you had to recognize that you had to use the volume equation, plug in the proper values, solve properly, and get your final b value, and then use Pythagorean, plug in proper values, solve properly, and get a proper slant height, and finally use those set of values in the proper equation. So one check mark for proper equation, one check mark for proper values, and finally one accuracy mark for the final answer.